This is NEGOTIATEx TV.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the NEGOTIATEx podcast. I am your co-host, Nolan Martin. With me today is the greatest negotiator of all time. He said it himself, Aram Denesian. Aram, how are you doing today?
Nolan, I've never said those words. Wow. Well, your intros, I got to come up with a better counter than just saying that's wrong. Because that's actually that's not a great response. I should dig in and ask you why you think that, but it's kind of you to say, and as our listeners know, that is nothing can be further from the truth. But yeah, I am well. It is a dreary fall day here in New Hampshire, and it's feeling like fall. I mean, temperatures are that way. The colors are starting to turn, so I think we're in for a beautiful fall up here. Hopefully. I heard that the Farmer's Almanac though was saying we may have snow on turning leaves, which would be very sad. I like my fall, so I'm never in a rush. I want to enjoy the season that I'm in before we get on to the winter one. So
yeah, I'm looking outside right now. It doesn't look like we have a few leaves that are starting to change here in Virginia, but not too much. But definitely notice a difference in the evenings. Starting to get a little bit cooler. So, well, all right, enough about us. No one cares about us, I don't think. Anyways, we're here to talk today about Zopa, the zone of possible agreement. So, where on earth did this term come from, or how is it used today, Aram? And then we'll kind of get to what I think is going to be the best part of this episode, and everyone will kind of figure it out here shortly.
Sure. So the zone of possible agreement or potential agreement, I've seen it kind of framed up both ways, but zone of possible agreement. It's in fact, it's one of two terms that anyone who's ever taken a negotiation class is going to remember. If you ever taken a negotiation class, and I've had how many people come up to me and say, "Oh yeah, negotiation. It's all about BATNA and Zopa." And so BATNA being your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, your Zopa, the zone is, if you think about it kind of just in a simple, maybe buying, selling framework, it is kind of the space where any agreement may occur according to like a particular sort of mindset of negotiation. But if you are selling something to me, Nolan, and you obviously would like to sell, you'd like to sell as high as you could, and there's some minimal amount that you feel that you need to get. Maybe that is just personal preference. Maybe that's based on, who else you could sell to. All right. And I have, I'd love to get it for free if I could. I mean, at the lowest price possible. And I have some like upper price I'm willing to pay based on, again, where I could get it elsewhere or the value of going without it altogether, whatever. Those 2 points, the lowest you're willing to sell for and the highest I'm willing to pay, where there's an overlap, that zone becomes what we call our Zopa.
All right. So with the Zopa, there's that zone where, someone wants to sell something, someone wants to buy something. So they fit in that zone. There's some price right there where they can both come to an agreement as according to the Zopa. But what happens when they don't intersect? I'm sure that there's many, negotiations where they're not going to intersect. So what does Zopa say about that, Aram?
Yeah. So the common kind of thought process is if there is no overlap, right? If I'm buying something from you, Nolan, and the most I'm willing to pay is beneath the least you're willing to accept, that we would just walk away from that there's no sense in negotiating because there is no zone of potential agreement. Which again is according to a particular mindset that can be somewhat problematic and probably worth questioning. Yeah.
Well, let's dig into that. Let's kind of talk about why it's problematic. From my perspective, as you kind of explained that right there, is that we're making this very one-dimensional, and I think we all know that negotiations is very three-dimensional, where there's going to be many different things, many different possible ways to get to a negotiation. So is that kind of what this is doing? Is it basically making it extremely one-dimensional, like something you would explain to someone in walking or just in passing by, but not getting at really what we're trying to uncover here in this podcast.
Sure. So there are circumstances, absolutely, where price is the only issue being negotiated, and so maybe you can make something very singular, and it fits nicely on this kind of horizontal line that when we visualize Zopa as, you can do that. You can see if there's an overlap around price, and that could be, you at the bazaar, us over. Craigslist buying or selling something, or even with a supplier providing, widget A. And so maybe you can describe it. The problem is that in most professional negotiations and many personal negotiations, it isn't singular. There are other issues, right? So it's not just price, it's quality and it's delivery and it's guarantees and it's even the working relationship. All these things have value, and they're pretty hard, as you're saying, to encapsulate, represent on a one kind of a two-dimensional line, because it's definitely at least three-dimensional, which is why we approach the problem very differently. And it's one of the reasons I don't teach Zopa. It's a term that I don't find particularly helpful for students.
Yeah, and I think that I could see how it kind of shut someone down to thinking that, I mean, basically we're just going to start haggling over prices, and definitely, definitely what we're trying to convince everyone that negotiations is totally not that, but everyone seems to think that that is how you do a negotiations, to concede until you come to some sort of agreement for both parties. So
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's what we're always. I mean, the tendency is to be constantly drawn back to the idea of concessions, conceding, compromise, because that's woven kind of within us, implanted within us, is the idea that that's what a negotiation is about. So we're going to keep coming back to that, and Zopa kind of reinforces that. And it says, hey, if there isn't this overlap, there's no place to make a concession, there's no place to compromise. Therefore, we should just walk away. And as we've talked through the circle of value approach, right, it's actually saying, well, wait on, hold on for a second. What are the full number of interests that parties have? Because they are multidimensional and they're right there. So what are they? And are there other ways to create value and actually create a Zopa, where no Zopa exists? And maybe if we start thinking about that, maybe there's a huge place for us to reach agreement, right? So, I mean, a number of the cases that I will use when I teach, I will have things where it's fairly clear, right? You got a Zopa, just because I'm not teaching that concept, I'm teaching other concepts, but it helps that there's a place where they can reach an agreement. I then have a place where I have a case where students assume the Zopa is this, but it's actually much broader. And so it's about understanding some of the concepts we've talked about. And then I have a case where there is no overlap at all. There is no zone of potential agreement. And you know what? 99% of the students still reach an agreement, because by that time in the course, we've gotten them to a point where they are thinking more broadly about negotiation, all 7 of these elements of negotiation power, and how to kind of bring them to bear. And they just blow through it, and they don't get caught up with, oh, there's no zone of potential agreement here, around the financial aspect, because there's value elsewhere.
yeah, I think that's it's pretty powerful, and it's pretty important to understand that, you know, it's almost like I would say like a debilitating mindset that, you know, I mean, we're not gonna rehash it again, but very two-dimensional versus very, very complex way to solve the solution. So I think, I mean, is there anything that you want to cover on Zopa?
Yeah, so I would just say, I mean, you made a comment earlier about, and just kind of hit it again with debilitating mindset, but walking away when an agreement is possible. Um, and I think that, again, this concept gets us so fixated on the positions that we can lose sight of, what's possible, what's really possible, right? And it's funny that word is in there. Um, so when I was in Afghanistan, was just I again worked with a variety of folks attending different meetings. So I'm in this meeting around border security, customs, and we were working with a customs chief. I was really just a participant to the meeting, and this customs chief who hadn't really been involved came kind of Afghan. He comes to the table with this proposal, um, and he made it. It sounded like an offer. I get that. And talking about some ways to simplify activities at the border because of the challenges he was facing, both with the literacy of his staff and other things. And rather than treat that as one thing we could do and use it kind of as a brainstorming session, because it was so far out, right? And I don't know how far out it really was from like the zone of potential agreement, but it was something that wasn't really feasible. The officer who was running that meeting shut it down, said, no, we would never do that, and really brought an end to the negotiation very prematurely. Um, Rather than using that as an opportunity to understand the concerns more, labeling that one of many things we could do, understanding, how that could be seen as fair and legitimate, things that you and I have talked about, maybe leveraging some of those more enabling and empowering assumptions that we've referred to in previous sessions, podcasts. So rather than do that, it shut it down, right? And by the terms of Zopa, probably didn't do anything wrong. And that's why I have a real problem with this term, is that there actually was a discussion to be had. There actually was a problem to be solved, and there actually were ways to do it. And for the first time, we were getting our counterpart engaged in that, and we shut it down because we perceived there to be no Zopa, and so we shut it down very prematurely before I could get to the officer and say, "Hey, run with this for a little bit. Go with this." Um,
Yeah, and I think we both know what that's going to happen or how that's going to impact future success in negotiations, right? When you shut down someone, that's going to be a difficult hurdle to overcome to be able to get them to open up, to be able to get any value in the future. So, I mean, that's definitely a mistake I think I made as a junior officer, but luckily I kind of was able to see the impact and adjusted as I continue to mature in my career. So, yeah, I think I'm just curious, was there ever, were they able to, solve this problem, or did you notice that um, this particular Afghan leader was able to, bounce back from being shut down like that?
Yeah, we never readdressed. We didn't really reengage, and it had been ended. I mean, the power, the value in a term like Zopa is it does let you know kind of what your BATNAs are, as long as they are well crafted and they're not arbitrary, right? And so you kind of know maybe what you can't agree to. Although I would say I don't need this term to be able to do that. Um, so I don't disagree with the officer for withholding commitment to something they can't commit to. Um, but it didn't need to shut down the entire process. And that mindset that, well, if it's outside my Zopa, then I would never, we wouldn't negotiate, is difficult. And even folks who teach Zopa who then say, well, you should bring in more aspects to it. I think that translates very difficult to students, right? We need to bring all these other issues to the table. The circle of value approach, and I know I'm kind of getting into probably our key takeaways. The circle of value approach, and the fact that the idea that it's a circle, and you can imagine that being maybe multidimensional, right? Actually allows us to, it encapsulates the things that we'd want to expand the zone, those interests, those options, and those standards of legitimacy. That's what we're going to need to create Zopas where there are none, right? To really broaden them when we start to think we're getting narrow, and to do all the work that you and I've talked about in this podcast. And it's why, folks, I don't teach it. It's the one time we'll talk about it because Nolan twisted my arm. So let's talk about this term.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and I know that many of our listeners are going to appreciate it because they probably have heard this term, but didn't necessarily know how it fits into what we talk about. And so now y'all can see that it kind of doesn't fit into how we talk about things. So, but with that, this is a podcast that is all about helping you elevate your influence through purposeful negotiations. And what that means, again, is that, people go through negotiations on a daily basis. They just may not realize that what they are in, what they are communicating, how they're doing it is in a negotiation. So we teach you to be purposeful, to come prepared with the plan to be able to get the results that you want. So with that, Aram, key takeaways from today's podcast.
Yeah, lots of terms you can learn in negotiation. Don't waste your time on ones that aren't going to make you more effective. Know what your interests are. Be really clear about your interests, your needs, fears, concerns, motivations. You're trying to get satisfied. Appeal to the power of creativity at the table with the person you're with to come up with many options, things you might do together. Acknowledge the fact that both you and that counterpart have alternatives. Know what your baton is. Know how you can satisfy your interests elsewhere. Don't agree to something that's worse than your BATNA. And as you're evaluating your BATNA and your options, okay, options O on the table, alternatives A away from the table, as you're evaluating them, remember which one satisfies your interest better, which one is more fair, defendable, reasonable, so that you can take it back and defend a solution to your toughest counterpart. That doesn't fit on some arbitrary horizontal two-dimensional line. We got to think more broadly than that.
Yeah, I don't even think I'm going to try to top that key takeaway. I think that was pretty powerful for everyone listening. For checking out today's podcast, we greatly appreciate it. If you could do us a favor, head over to wherever you are listening to this podcast. You can give us a rating, a review, leave us 5 stars. We'd really appreciate it. We know we are growing, and we're growing actually pretty quickly. So we're extremely excited that we are having this growth and that we're sharing with you the information to help you all become better leaders. So greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening to today's episode. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NEGOTIATEx TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you in your small business, your team are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to NEGOTIATEx.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over in the next video.